Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1976 cult film God Told Me To. Now, this is a film that, to me personally, is an unquestionably unique blend of sci-fi and horror. It's one of those films that, when you see it for the first time, it really registers with you. It really resonates and it stays with you because it's just so out there. And that is something that was rather common with Larry Cohen's filmography and with the type of films that he liked to make. And Larry is well known as a renegade, as a guy who would push the boundaries and he'd go to places where other filmmakers might not go to. And God Told Me To is a prime example of this. This is a very ballsy film because it is the epitome of blasphemy. It's it's putting the name God on all of these horrible mass murders and insinuating that maybe God or Jesus or the Messiah in the Bible is not what the Bible makes them out to be. And that is something that even today is very controversial. It came out in 1976 to pretty much no fanfare. It didn't do well at all. A lot of critics hated it, including Roger Ebert, who gave it 1 out of 4 stars. And it didn't really do that much in the box office. In fact, it underperformed so badly that the company that released the film, or had the rights for the film, changed the title and called it Demon and re-released it in theaters. And apparently did a little better with that title, which is too bad because Demon is such a generic title. God Told Me To is a much better title than Demon. Demon is like the epitome of generic. Like, it's the type of title that you'd expect to see, or it's at like at a Walmart. So like a Sam's Club. It's the Sam's Club God Told Me To is Demon. But that being said, this is a movie that I've always enjoyed since the first time I saw it. And I was drawn to it based on my experience after reading the novelization. I read the novelization and I was really drawn into it. The plot was crazy. It was weird. It was out there. And I liked the overall structure of it. And I was like, this is a good read. I want to see the film. And eventually I was able to track down the film on DVD. And I've had this DVD for quite a while now. Like, this is on the row and on one of my shelves that consists of like some of the first DVDs that I got when I moved back in with my mom here in Vancouver, Washington. So yeah, I've had it for that long, like 7, 8, maybe even 10 years. So yeah, this has been in my collection for a good amount of time. And after watching it again, it still holds up really well. It's still a really strong film. I have some issues with the ending and with a particular twist, but other than that, I think it's an excellent film. I really do. I think this is a really underrated gem. Even though it does have a lot of newfound critical acclaim, this is one of those movies that, much like something like Blade Runner, the same critics that derided it or slammed it or weren't fans of it have done a complete 180 on the film. As my throat apparently does a 180 or 360, or well, not really 360. Just go sideways. Sorry about that. So yeah, so the critics, they did a complete 180 on the film and now they love it. It's actually been included in like best of horror lists, and I don't know if I'd put it that high because as a horror film, it's not really that scary. Like, I don't agree with the Soho News, who says it's one hell of a scary movie. I wouldn't really say that. I would say it's extraordinary. I do really feel that this is a fairly extraordinary film for what it is. But I don't see it as a scary film. I mean, there are aspects of the plot that are scary. There are scenes that are unnerving, but I don't think they're scary. See, I think it's one hell of an unnerving movie. That's a good way to put it. But I don't think it's really a scary film. It's a much more effective police procedural, sci-fi thriller than it is a horror film. Now, it's directed by Larry Cohen, who is a absolute master at getting the most out of a small budget. And this film is no exception. He really does deliver the goods when it comes to his direction. It's dynamic, it's interesting, it's got different takes and different techniques for shots that are littered throughout the film. He really does a great job when it applies to using stock footage for moments in the film where the budget really wouldn't allow him to make a spaceship. So he uses some stock footage from some other TV shows in a rather creative way to work around that. He also has a good eye for really bringing to life the seedy underbelly of New York City, and you can tell that this is a man who's a New Yorker and just loves his city, warts and all. I mean, this is a director who's done a slew of films that take place in New York City. A lot of his films take place in New York, and for good reason, because that's his comfort zone. He knows New York like the back of his own hand. He's very passionate about telling stories that take place in New York. That's one way to maintain your passion for filmmaking, is to place it in a setting that you're very passionate about. And Larry Cohen does that with God Told Me To and various other films in his filmography. His writing in this is also top-notch. Larry Cohen, to me, has always been one of the better writer-directors of this particular genre. And in that instance, he will be greatly missed because there aren't that many writer-directors that are as solid as Larry Cohen. I would say Jordan Peele's getting up there a little bit for me because he's starting to really pick up some steam. But other than Jordan Peele at the moment, I can't think of a horror director that is as effective as Larry Cohen when it comes to writing and directing, especially as of late. And because Eli Roth and Rob Zombie aren't in the conversation, and a lot of his scripts, they have bits of social commentary, but in this instance, this is his film where he's just skewering religion. He's just fucking with religion. He's fucking with the Bible. He's just pissing on it. He's like, I don't give a shit. I am going all in, and I am crossing the biggest line here. He even said that he wanted to do the film because he felt that God in the Bible is one of the most violent characters in all of literature. And he has a point. Especially the Old Testament God. That's a pretty violent, wrathful, vengeful character. And I think he struck gold here with this film. Because most of the time when you have a film that at the center of it is this series of just mass killings, a lot of the crazy characters or the perpetrators, they say something like, well, the devil made me do it. Well, and God told me to, they say God told me to. And just that little simple twist is just so effective and so compelling. The film opens up with with a bang, literally. There is this person who gets on top of a water tower and just starts shooting people in the streets of New York, picking them off one by one. And in today's day and age, where it seems like there's a mass shooting every other day, this particular scene and the other scenes in the film that deal with mass shootings really does stick with you, because it's one of those things where it's something that is still very relevant and still very resonant to this day, like 30, 40 years later. And things just start to escalate. You have this killing, just a series of killings, just shootings in the streets of New York. And then You have a mass stabbing that occurs in a supermarket. And then you have another shooting that happens at a St. Patrick's Day parade where you have a person dresses up as a police officer and just starts shooting people at the parade. The person actually happened to be played by Andy Kaufman in his acting debut, which is an interesting bit of trivia. And then after that, it culminates in a mass murder by a father and a husband of his entire family. And the film does not show it on screen. That's another example of why Larry Cohen's writing is just so great. He doesn't show it. He doesn't show the kids getting killed or the wife getting shot. He doesn't take that route. Instead, he takes a very different route and has the horrific events revealed to you by the person who committed them. And an interview between him and the lead, who is a police officer. And this scene is so unsettling because, much like everyone else who's asked why they did these horrible things, why they committed these crimes, they all said, God told me to. And they all did it in a way that's just nonchalant and blasé and very eerie because it seems like they've been hypnotized, which ultimately is the case. And the character, who's the husband and the father who killed his family, the actor who plays him is great, and his line delivery is just chilling, and he's just sitting there like, you know, like he's just waiting for, you know, some tea to get brought over to him so he can take a sip of it and just chill. And he's talking about how he killed his family and how it was a weight off his shoulders, and how what he did was not anything different than what Abraham did in the Bible, where he killed his son as a sacrifice to God. And it eventually upsets the main character, the protagonist, so much that he just starts grabbing his throat and just trying to kick his ass right then and there. So, yeah, really effective opening for the film. The first 30 minutes or so are just really, really strong. And the film continues to be strong, but in a different way when it comes to Cohen's script, when it's revealed who this God is. It's this weird human-alien hybrid who goes under the name Bernard Phillips, which is his name that he was given to him when he was born. And you get little hints on what he might be early on, where the police officer, he's a detective. He's not just a police officer. So the detective, Peter Nicholas, he does an investigation trying to figure out what's going on, because he's talking to people on the street, and they're talking about how there's this weird guy who had long hair and was walking barefoot. So he digs deeper into this character, and he sees his birth records. Finds out when he was born, the doctor was like, I didn't really know what gender this baby was. I couldn't tell. Couldn't tell if it was male or female. It was very bizarre. And ultimately, he does meet Bernard face to face, and it's quite a intriguing meeting. And speaking of Bernard, Larry Cohen had perfect casting here when he cast Richard Lynch as this alien human hybrid messiah. He's got this long flowing hair, and there's just golden, you know, he's covered in gold paint, and he has all this just aura around him, much like a god would. But it's played by Richard Lynch, who is one of the creepiest actors out there. I mean, in terms of, like, when it comes to playing creepy characters, like, he's one of the best because he's so good at being creepy. You might recognize him from Alligator, as well as films like Bad Dreams, where he played the main antagonist. And in this is arguably one of his creepiest roles. It's not his most creepy role, because it's just so unearthly and weird, and he's covered in gold, and it's just shining, and he's speaking in a way that's just so holy, but unholy at the same time. And then when it's revealed what he is, and he lifts up his shirt, and he literally has a space vagina on his chest. An alien vagina. I'm not making this shit up. I wouldn't be able to make this shit up even if I took tons of drugs. I don't think I'd be able to do it. So, and that's, I mean, that's another testament to Larry Cohen and his ability as a writer. I mean, you got it, fucking Richard Lynch wearing a wig, walking around barefoot. He's got like this glowing aura around him, and he's got a fucking space vagina on his chest, and it just comes across as weird and not laughable. I mean, that's not an easy feat at all. I think if this film had any other filmmaker or writer behind it, it would be a total joke, and nobody would have been able to take it seriously, and it would just been a total trash fire. But since it was Larry Cohen, he knew how to take this absurd, this insane idea and make it work. Space vaginas just make everything in this film it strengthens the film. It doesn't make it any weaker. It makes it even crazier and weird and offbeat, which is the main focus and goal of the film. Ultimately, is to just be as out there as humanly possible. And yeah, I mean, it does weigh that down though with some reality, which is another reason why it works so well, because instead of just having nothing but insane, crazy, weird ass shit nonstop, it does bother to actually take some things seriously, which adds some weight to the craziness, which is something that a lot of filmmakers could take some notes from, where you could have these type of ideas and these concepts, but unless you're making a comedy, you need to have something that brings it down to earth. Something that helps the audience connect with it more on a deeper level than just a superficial one where you're just like, oh, this is just weird and this is crazy. The only aspect of the script, though, that I wasn't really a fan of is the ending. The twist is that Detective Nicholas. I was way off there. Detective Nicholas. He's actually the first alien-human hybrid, but it was a failure because the alien part of him was so slim. It didn't take over like it did with Richard Lynch's character. And that in itself, okay, that's a decent twist. All right, it makes things a little bit more intriguing as the film goes on. But the way that it shows him use his powers is pretty ruthless. He kills this old group of pimps. There's this pimp in this bar and his cronies, and he kills them all with his mind. And it seemed a little too ruthless for the character in terms of how he was being represented early in the film, but maybe that's the point. And that in itself isn't that big of a deal, but combined with the twist at the end where he's arrested and he's arrested for the murder of Bernard Phillips because he ultimately kills the character, but he does it in a way where it looks like it's an accident because he's using his mind. I think he tries to choke him out and beats him up. And I don't know if he shoots him or not. I think maybe he was thinking about doing it, but he wasn't able to. And Bernard essentially dies because he uses his abilities, his psychic abilities, to cause the building to fall down around him. And inexplicably, Nicholas is then charged with the murder of Bernard. It just doesn't make any sense, because how would the cops know that he killed him? It was an absolute just crazy, unexplained event where the whole house just collapsed in on itself. The apartment just collapsed in on itself. How is that? Oh, you're the one that caused it. They didn't have any proof. So why was he convicted of murdering Bernard? Did he admit that he did it? And then, not only that, when he's asked by reporters why he did it, he says, God told me to. And then there's this crawl on the bottom of the screen that says, Peter J. Nicholas committed to an insane asylum. So I'm like, why would, what? I don't like that ending. It doesn't make any sense, and it just comes across as Larry Cohen's, like, one last little attempt to try to be different and try to take, you know, a wild spin, but it just, unlike the other ones, it wasn't anywhere near as effective, and it just stood out like a sore thumb, because it's like, why? That was completely and totally unnecessary. It should have just ended with Nicholas just escaping the house, and Bernard is dead. He did his service, or maybe he dies too. It's a self-sacrifice. He sacrifices himself, and in the process saves the earth by killing this god in Bernard. Instead of, he kills him and then he's like, God told me to, and he gets committed to an insane asylum. Like, I don't know about that ending. I'm not really a fan of that. But it ties into how Larry Cohen writes his characters, where they're not cookie cutter. And I do like that aspect of this script, is that the character Peter Nicholas, like, he's not perfect. Like, he's dating another woman while he's married. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff you don't really see as much nowadays. You have a protagonist who's flawed, and not only that, he's not entirely human. So that's also quite fascinating. And I know I've spent like a good chunk of this video just talking about the script, but that's the strongest aspect of the film, is the screenplay. The dialogue, the moments in the film where you had to deal with the mass shootings and the murders, and it's just so compelling to me. Not the murders themselves, it's just the mystery of it all. Where after it happens, they're just like, the perpetrators are just like, God told me to. The cast is also quite strong. Tony Bianco, he plays the lead, a detective, Peter Nicholas. This is definitely one of his best performances. It seems like he didn't really get a lot of big roles in films. He was just relegated to a lot of TV work. I remember him from episodes of TV anthologies, like, I think the 80s Twilight Zone, I think it was in one episode. And he was also in Tales from the Dark Side, if I remember correctly. And here he's solid. I know initially Robert Forster was cast, but he had such a really hard time working with Larry Cohen that he just quit. So Tony Bianco was a last minute replacement, and I just wish that Robert and Larry would have been able to work better with one another, because this film would have been even better with Robert Forster. I love Robert Forster as an actor. He's great in Alligator. He was even great in The Banker. I think he's a really great underrated actor. And him in this role would have just taken this film to an even higher level. Like, Tony Bianco, he's good, but he's no Robert Forster. Deborah Raffin, she plays his wife. She does a good job with what she's tasked to work with. It's a pretty depressing character, to be honest. But, you know, it makes sense. This poor girl, she's dealt with 3 miscarriages with Peter, because Peter didn't want the child to be born. So, unconsciously, somehow, you know, he was able to use his powers to kill the kid. before it was born. And it was for the greater good because, as Bernard says later in the film, if it was born, it would be just like him. Sandy Dennis is also in this as his new girlfriend, Martha. You have Sylvia Sidney, who you might recognize as a caseworker from Beetlejuice. She's in this as what ends up being Peter's mother. And then you have a few other actors and actresses like Robert Drivas as David Morton, Mike Kellin as a deputy police commissioner, Harry Belliver as Cookie, who I think is the pimp who ultimately kills one of the cops and tries to blame it on the series of killings that are attributed to God. And of course, Richard Lynch. I mean, you can't forget Richard Lynch, who plays Bernard. It's rather unassuming and lame name for a god, but, you know, I mean, God Bernard. All hail Bernard. Like, you know, I mean, it doesn't have the same ring to it as other gods do in literature. Now, the film also, apparently, there were some issues with shooting. Like, for instance, I believe during the sequence in the parade, what happened was Cohen didn't have a permit, which happens a lot when you have films that are shot in New York. I mean, Ghostbusters had a lot of scenes in it that were shot without a permit because it's so damn expensive to get a permit. So, yeah, during the St. Patrick's Day scene, he did not have a permit to film the scene, but he did it anyway. Which, you know, hey, that's another thing that just really highlights Larry Cohen. He's like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. Which is what he did for most of his career when it comes to a lot of the films that he would do. There would be some films that weren't really like Return to Salem's Lot, for instance, is a little different than a lot of his normal fare, which was doing stuff that was outside the box or carrying on with franchises that he created, like It's Alive. But for the most part, Larry really was, like I said, he was a renegade. He was an outsider. And it's a big part of why he left behind such a great legacy as a filmmaker and as a writer. And why he will continue to live on forever, long after his death, because of his attention and care that he put into his films and into his work. And the fact that he was just so willing to take those risks. Now, God told me to, I'm trying to think of any other aspects of the film I want to mention. I definitely want to mention the score. Originally, Bernard Herrmann was his original choice to do the score for the film. I mean, he did the score for It's Alive, but Herrmann wasn't able to do it, and sadly, he actually passed away after seeing an unscored version of the film. Instead, the musical score duties were given to Frank Cordell. And Frank Cordell, I don't think he did a whole lot after this, but his score in this is honestly quite amazing. It's a nice mix of eerie, creepy choral compositions, as well as some nice instrumental work. I really like this score. I think it's a wonderful score. The editing by Chris Lebenson is also quite excellent. The film says it's 91 minutes, but the running time on the DVD is only 89. I think there's something wrong. Like, it even says 92 minutes on the back of this DVD. Like, it's not that long at all. It's like an hour and 29 minutes. It's a really short film for the most part. It goes by pretty quick, too. I don't think it really has any pacing problems. It keeps you invested and intrigued throughout. It's got solid enough characters that you care about what's going on. And then you have the whole mysterious plot that's woven in with these murders and this god and so on and so forth. And, you know, bringing up these questions like, what if the messiahs in literature really weren't what they said they were? What if they were alien human hybrids? Who knows? I mean, kind of, it makes sense that Larry Cohen was inspired by Chariots of the Gods, because that film and that book dealt a lot with ancient aliens. So you could say long before Ancient Aliens and, Giorgio was like aliens, you had Larry Cohen and Chariots of the Gods and films like God Told Me To that were having people ponder and wonder, like, what if things were out of this world when it comes to the messiahs and when it comes to God on earth. But anyway, I've talked your ear off long enough about this film. I really don't know what else to say about it. I've said probably more about this film than anyone else has said about this movie on YouTube. But for good reason, because I really like this film. I think it's definitely worth your time if the idea sounds intriguing to you. And it is on YouTube, like not in like HD quality, but it is on YouTube. I'll probably put a link in the video description down below, along with the trailer. The DVD by Blue Underground is fine. It's got a pretty decent audio commentary, but it doesn't have any extra features in terms of interviews. There was a recent Blu-ray that Blue Underground did, or they did in the past, which has some extra features that I'd like to get my hands on one of these days. But until then, I'm fine with the DVD. It's kind of lame cover art and all. I prefer the poster versus this cover art. It's pretty tacky. But other than that, I mean, really, the biggest issues I have with this film are this tacky cover art, the ending, and some aspects of the character played by Tonino Bianco, Peter Nicholas. Especially when it comes to like how they're revealing his alien side and how he handles it. But other than that, I think it's a really excellent and extraordinary film in its own right. So I don't know what else to say, except if I were rated out of 5 stars, I would give God Told Me To 4.5 out of 5. Yeah, I like that. I like this film that much. Even though the ending I don't like, it doesn't entirely kill the film for me, because it's such a weird, strange movie that type of ending just kind of fits in with the rest of it. Not as well as the rest of the film, but it still fits in there somewhat and doesn't affect my overall enjoyment of the movie that much. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of God Told Me To, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.